Have you ever spent like hours on hold with a massive utility company? Or maybe, the DMV,
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst.
right? You know that feeling of being just completely helpless. You're listening to that terrible elevator music, you're trapped in this maze of automated menus.
And no one actually has the authority to help you.
Exactly. But I mean, it's frustrating when it's about a late fee, right?
Huh?
Or a vehicle registration. But I want you to imagine that exact same impenetrable bureaucracy, but this time the stakes are, well, they're the highest stakes imaginable.
Yeah. The entity on the other end of the phone holds the legal right to decide whether or not you can see your own children.
Right. It completely changes the scale of the nightmare because, when you're dealing with a misplaced billing address, bureaucratic incompetence is just, well, it's a nuisance.
But when you're dealing with child custody and allegations of abuse, that kind of incompetence or even just structural delay can permanently fracture a family.
And that terrifying scenario is exactly what we are doing a deep dive into today. So, welcome. Our mission here is to unpack this massive, incredibly complex paper trail.
Yeah. And it involves a Maine father, Ryan Michaels, and the state's Department of Health and Human Services.
Specifically, their Office of Child and Family Services, which you'll hear us refer to as OCFS throughout this.
Right. And I think we need to be crystal clear right out of the gate about the ground rules for our analysis today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are not here to act as a judge or a jury. We aren't here to assign guilt. And we are absolutely not here to validate the underlying allegations made by either the state or by the father.
Yeah, that's crucial. Our focus is entirely on the machinery of the system itself.
Exactly, because we have this stack of primary documents in front of us, right? Official state position statements, family court orders, filings with the Maine Human Rights Commission.
Plus all the Freedom of Information requests and administrative hearing records. It's a lot.
It is.
So think of this massive stack of documents, like a black box flight recorder that's just been pulled from the wreckage of a crash. We aren't the pilots.
Right, and we aren't the engineers who designed the plane either.
Exactly. We're just the investigators pulling the tape,
Yeah.
reading the telemetry, looking at what the data actually tells us about how this system operated in the air.
Where do the official state records agree? Where do they wildly contradict each other?
Right. And what happens to a normal person when the rules of the game seem to just change without warning?
Because when you look at the data in this black box, the very first anomaly that jumps out at you isn't like a dramatic courtroom battle.
No, it's not.
It's a structural failure in the timeline. We are looking at a documented administrative hold.
Basically a system-wide pause.
Yes,
Mhm.
a pause that left this father waiting for an appeal hearing for an incredibly long time.
Hmm.
And in the world of child protective services, time is never a neutral factor.
No, time is leverage. Okay, so let's look at how this pause actually played out, because the way he finds out about it is, honestly, it's wild.
It really is.
He doesn't get a formal letter in the mail explaining the delay. He has to dig for it. So, in the files, there's a document labeled FOAA Request 1400.
And for anyone not steeped in Maine government acronyms, FOAA stands for the Freedom of Access Act.
Right, it's basically Maine's version of the Federal Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, the law that lets citizens demand public records.
So on August 1st, 2025, he submits this formal request. He's asking the state for records about a specific decision to place OCFS investigative appeals on hold.
And just to clarify, those are appeals regarding child abuse or neglect findings.
Right. And he's asking about a hold between June of 2024 and June of 2025. A whole year.
A full year. And he didn't just, pull those dates out of thin air.
No, he's asking because of another document in our stack. There's a transcript from a phone call he had on April 8th, 2025.
With DHHS appeals staff.
Exactly. And in that call, the staff explicitly told him that OCFS investigative appeals were put on hold so that the department could prioritize MaineCare appeals.
Which we have to pause here to really understand the mechanics of what that means. Because MaineCare is the state's Medicaid program.
Right.
So MaineCare appeals generally deal with medical coverage, billing disputes, benefit allocations, things like that.
Financial stuff.
Yes. OCFS appeals, on the other hand, deal with a citizen trying to overturn a state, finding that they are a child abuser.
Right. The stakes are completely different.
And according to the transcript and evidence, the agency made a system-wide decision to prioritize the financial and medical coverage appeals over the child protective appeals.
Hold on. You're telling me a state agency can just decide completely on its own to stop processing child abuse appeals so they can catch up on Medicaid paperwork?
Whoa.
I mean, is that even legal? And more importantly, how do they do that without telling anyone?
That is precisely the question he was trying to answer with his FOAA request. He was asking the fundamental questions of administrative law.
Right.
He wanted the written memos or policies authorizing this hold. He wanted to know who made the decision, what the rationale was.
And where the plan was for notifying the public.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you cannot simply freeze a citizen's right to due process in secret.
Exactly.
It's like playing a high-stakes game of chess, and suddenly the referee just changes how the knight is allowed to move.
Yeah.
And when you ask to see the rule book, the referee refuses to show it to you, but still penalizes you for moving your piece the wrong way.
It's incredibly frustrating.
So when he asks for this written policy, what does the state actually give him?
Nothing.
Nothing.
According to the documentary record, those specific questions went entirely unanswered.
Wow.
He sent follow-up emails. He sent a detailed follow-up on September 2nd, 2025, directly to the DHHS public access officer. He even got the state ombudsman involved. But despite all of that, no policy, no memo, and no executive directive authorizing this hiatus was ever produced.
How does a massive government bureaucracy operate a system-wide pause without a single piece of paper authorizing it? I mean, if I want to change my lunch hour at work, I have to fill out a form.
It's true, and it represents a profound breakdown in how government is supposed to function. Administrative agencies, they only have the power that the legislature gives them.
Right, they aren't a law unto themselves.
Exactly. And they are required to operate through written procedures. If an agency changes its operations, especially operations concerning something as severe as child protective substantiations, there must be a paper trail.
An emergency rulemaking order, an executive memo, or, at least some internal guidance.
Something. Unwritten policies are dangerous because they are invisible. You can't legally challenge a rule that doesn't exist on paper. And when the state claims the power to label you an abuser, but then freezes your ability to clear your name without written authorization, the machinery of fairness just grinds to a halt.
It's like an airline indefinitely grounding your specific flight, but refusing to show you the cancellation policy or tell you who gave the order.
That's a perfect analogy.
Which naturally leads us to the fallout. Because life doesn't just hit the pause button while you wait for the government to schedule an appeal hearing.
No, it absolutely does not.
We have to look at what actually happens to a family while their due process is frozen in this bureaucratic limbo.
Exactly. The paper trail shifts here from, abstract administrative delays to very concrete, severe consequences in family court.
Right.
We have to trace the timeline of what was happening to his custody rights while his administrative appeal was stalled.
So let's look at July 24th, 2024. The documents show that OCFS filed a request for a preliminary child protection order.
Right, a PPO.
Yeah, you'll hear this called a PPO in the legal world. And in this filing, the state is asking the court to immediately give custody of the children to their mother.
And require that any contact between the father and the children be strictly supervised.
And we must be precise about the state's rationale here, as documented in their own filings.
Yes. Let's look at the AG's position statement submitted later to the Maine Human Rights Commission.
The state explains that the PPO was based on an alleged, quote, immediate risk of serious harm.
Specifically, they alleged the father was allowing a perpetrator of domestic violence to live in his home.
Right, in violation of that person's bail conditions stemming from a prior domestic violence assault on the father himself.
So the state throws down this massive red flag, claiming immediate danger.
And the court signs the PPO the very same day it's filed.
They do. And a full hearing is scheduled for a couple of weeks later on August 7th, 2024.
But when August 7th rolls around, that child protection trial never actually happens.
No. The child protection case is dismissed by the state.
Because the parties agreed to an amended divorce judgment over in the family court docket.
Right. We have the actual family court order signed by Judge Sutton right here in the stack.
Yeah, and the terms are incredibly strict. It mandates a minimum of one 90-minute supervised visit per week for the father.
Just 90 minutes.
A week. It requires the visits to be fully supervised by a professional or someone mutually agreed upon. And it requires counseling.
Now, this is the exact moment where the official narratives from the state and the father violently collide.
Yeah, they are miles apart on this.
Let's break down the state's position first, because it relies heavily on the concept of standard legal procedure.
Right. DHHS asserts that this was a completely voluntary standard negotiation.
They point out the documented facts. The father had a lawyer present. He formally agreed to the terms of the amended divorce judgment. And because of that agreement, DHHS voluntarily dismissed the PPO.
And closed their active child protective case.
Exactly. From the agency's perspective, this is a clean, consensual resolution. The system worked.
But the father's position in the files paints a much, much darker picture of how that agreement was reached.
Oh, absolutely.
In his comprehensive rebuttal to the state, he explicitly argues that this was coercion disguised as negotiation.
He states that he was forced into a corner under the threat of a jeopardy petition.
Wait, before we go further, what exactly is a jeopardy petition? That sounds like a legal point of no return.
It essentially is. In the child welfare system, a jeopardy petition is a formal legal action where the state asks a judge to declare that the children are in circumstances of jeopardy to their health and welfare.
Okay.
If a judge makes that finding, it gives the state enormous power. It can lead to the children being placed in foster care, and it sets the stage for the potential termination of parental rights.
Wow.
It is the ultimate legal hammer the state possesses.
Okay, so that is the ultimate threat hanging over his head. He quotes himself in the official record, stating that he told Judge Sutton, "It's the choice I have to make." He argues that being forced to accept an hour and a half of supervised visitation a week just to avoid the state potentially severing your parental rights entirely, that isn't a voluntary choice.
It's bureaucratic extortion.
This is where we have to look at the mechanics of leverage, which ties directly back to that unwritten administrative hold we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Because in his documents, he notes that OCFS originally substantiated him based on claims involving gun violence related to an incident where he claims he was actually the victim.
And he says those charges were later dropped.
Right. He argues that because OCFS, quote unquote, kicked the can down the road and froze his administrative appeal, he was procedurally blocked from clearing his name of those original findings.
So the disputed agency findings, the very things he was trying to appeal but couldn't because the state was supposedly catching up on Medicaid paperwork, those findings were still sitting there.
Actively poisoning his family court case.
Let's make sure we're separating the facts from the allegations here for the listener.
Good idea.
The documented fact is that the August 7th order was signed, and he had a lawyer.
Yes.
The disputed allegation is whether it was truly voluntary. But honestly, I mean, put yourself in the shoes for a second.
It's hard to imagine.
If the system for appealing a finding is frozen, and the state is threatening you with a jeopardy petition based on those unappealable findings, do you really have the leverage to negotiate fairly?
From a purely structural standpoint, true negotiation requires alternatives.
Right.
If your only alternative to accepting 90 minutes of supervised visitation is a massive child protection trial where the state will use findings against you that you've been blocked from appealing.
Your leverage is zero.
Exactly. The documents highlight a profound philosophical tension here. The state points to a signed piece of paper as proof of a consensual resolution.
And the father points to the broken machinery behind that piece of paper as proof of duress.
Yeah.
So we have a father cornered into accepting severely restricted visitation because his appeal is frozen in limbo. But it gets so much worse.
It really does.
Because when he starts trying to fight back and demand answers, he discovers that the state's official paperwork about his case isn't even physically accurate.
No.
Let's look at the objectively verifiable inconsistencies in these files.
When analysts evaluate a documentary record, the first thing they look for is internal consistency.
Right.
If an agency's timeline of events shifts depending on which official document you are reading, the integrity of the entire record collapses.
And in this specific stack of documents, the discrepancies aren't just, minor typos. They fundamentally alter the narrative of events.
Let's start with the shifting dates. The state claims that this father was becoming disruptive and harassing staff at their offices.
Yeah, in the DHHS position statement submitted to the Human Rights Commission, the Assistant Attorney General writes that the father appeared at the Biddeford DHHS office on February 21st, 2025.
And again on March 4th, 2025.
However, the father's rebuttal file includes DHHS's very own intake logs and contact records.
Their own internal documents.
Exactly. And those internal logs document that these contacts actually occurred on February 20th and March 11th.
Now, a listener might be thinking, okay, a day here, a week there, who cares? People get dates wrong.
Sure, humans make mistakes.
But it becomes a massive narrative-shifting deal when you look at the paper trail of the no trespass orders.
Right. In the state's files, there's a letter signed by an assistant program administrator named Amy Sully. It's dated March 1st, 2025.
And it references a previous no trespass order from December 3rd, 2024, that banned him from the Sanford office.
The timeline is the entire key to understanding this interaction. The state's narrative, based on their dates, is that the father was engaging in unprovoked, disruptive behavior at the Biddeford office in early March, specifically March 4th, which led them to issue a new no trespass order for the Biddeford location as well.
But the father's records prove he didn't even receive the March 1st letter from Amy Sully until mid-March.
After March 11th.
Right. And he states in his files that receiving this delayed, confusing letter is exactly why he was at the Biddeford office in the first place.
Think about it. He gets banned from the Sanford office in December. He hears nothing official for months.
Nothing.
Finally, in mid-March, a letter shows up referencing the December ban. He goes to the Biddeford office simply to get clarification on a letter he just opened.
Exactly. If the state's dates are wrong, their entire portrait of a man engaging in random, unprovoked harassment completely falls apart.
It suddenly looks like a citizen desperately trying to get basic answers from an unresponsive bureaucracy whose mail is running weeks late.
The narrative shifts from malice to confusion.
But somehow, that's not even the biggest discrepancy.
That's not.
The most stunning contradiction in this entire stack of documents is how the state handled his disability.
Yes. This is the discrepancy that transcends a chronological error and points to a massive systemic failure. In the state's formal response to the Maine Human Rights Commission, which was filed on August 4th, 2025, the state's legal counsel asserts, and I will quote this directly, "It is unknown whether the complainant is a qualified individual with a disability."
And the document further claims he never requested any modifications for a disability during the CPS process.
So they are telling a civil rights oversight body, we have no idea if this guy is disabled, he never asked us for help.
But then we turn the page in our stack of documents and we find a notice of decision from the department's own ADA and Civil Rights Coordinator.
From their own department.
Yes, it's dated March 30th, 2026. This official agency document explicitly acknowledges the father as a, quote, person with a disability, as defined in the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990.
And it formally grants him specific accommodations.
It is an undeniable, objectively verifiable contradiction printed right there on the state's own letterhead.
It's astounding.
How does that actually happen? I mean, how can a government agency legally claim they don't know a citizen has a disability in one legal venue while they have an active file accommodating that exact disability in another department?
This is where we really have to understand how bureaucratic silos work. In massive state agencies, the left hand rarely talks to the right hand.
Yeah.
You have an assistant attorney general drafting a defensive legal posture for the Human Rights Commission in one building, relying on whatever incomplete files were handed to them.
While meanwhile, in another building, an ADA coordinator is actually doing intake.
Reviewing medical records and granting accommodations.
But that shouldn't be an excuse.
Oh, it isn't an excuse. It's just an explanation of the mechanism. But you are absolutely right to be outraged, because while we shouldn't assume malicious intent, the structural failure is deeply dangerous.
Right.
Why does accuracy in governmental records matter? Because courts, human rights commissions, and administrative hearing officers rely entirely on these documents to make life-altering decisions.
Yeah. They treat these documents as the gold standard of truth.
If an agency's record-keeping is so fractured that it denies a citizen's civil rights status in one breath while managing an active accommodation file in the next, the very foundation of fairness is cracked.
The state controls the ink.
Therefore, the state has an absolute, uncompromising obligation to ensure the ink is accurate.
So put yourself in Ryan Michaels' shoes.
Okay.
Your appeal is frozen. You've been pressured into seeing your kids for 90 minutes a week. You realize the state's dates about your actions are totally wrong, and they are legally denying knowledge of your disability.
It's a nightmare.
How do you respond? What the documents show is that he did the only logical thing left. He started generating a massive paper trail of his own.
He had to trap the system in its own contradictions.
Right. It's fascinating to watch the evolution of his correspondence in the files. At the beginning, you see a citizen just trying to navigate a normal process.
Asking basic questions.
Yeah. But as the delays and contradictions mount, the tone shifts. He transitions into someone who is actively, meticulously preserving a defensive legal record.
We see him file a formal objection on September 24th, 2025. He puts it in writing, objecting to the endless continuances of his hearing and the department's refusal to answer his basic questions about that administrative hold.
And then there's FOAA Request 1681. This one blew my mind.
Yes, FOAA 1681 is highly illustrative of the dynamic between the citizen and the state at this point.
The father submits a public records request asking if the department is conducting any post-closure monitoring of his public advocacy content.
Essentially, he wants to know if state employees are monitoring his social media pages.
Yeah, and what the official policy is regarding that kind of surveillance.
Which is a perfectly valid question for someone who feels targeted by an agency.
Right. And how does DHHS respond? They close the request in under 2 hours.
2 hours.
And what do they give him? A couple of random emails about hearing preparation and a generic Bureau of Human Resources pamphlet regarding employees' personal use of social media.
Which is an entirely non-responsive production. The father immediately points out to the ombudsman that handing over a generic HR policy.
A policy that just tells state workers not to post inappropriate things on their personal Facebook pages.
Right. That does not answer a specific legal request about whether the state is actively surveilling a private citizen's public advocacy.
It's like asking the police if you're under investigation, and they hand you a copy of the police department's employee dress code.
It's insulating, honestly.
And all of this frustration, all of this exhaustive paper trail finally culminates in a deeply contested administrative hearing in January of 2026.
This hearing is presided over by a hearing officer named Thomas Diebold.
According to the documents, this hearing was partially completed on January 14th, it was continued, and then ultimately the agency treated the father's appeal as abandoned.
Now, we need to do some very strict fact-checking right here regarding the dispute that actually derailed this hearing.
Yes, absolutely.
The agency's narrative hints heavily at a recording violation, but we must be incredibly clear. The documentary record absolutely does not prove that the father was caught recording the hearing.
That is such a crucial distinction.
The documents, specifically the hearing officer's own written notice, indicate that Mr. Diebold gave verbal warnings that recording the proceeding was not permitted.
Right.
Mr. Diebold suspected that recording was taking place, and he shut the hearing down based purely on that suspicion.
He didn't confiscate a device.
He did not confiscate a device or produce any actual proof of a recording.
And let's look at the father's documented position on this, because he addresses it head on.
Yeah, he does.
There is a documented telephone conversation where he expressly tells the state that the hearing officer's belief was an assumption, not a proven fact.
He wasn't admitting to secretly recording anything.
No, he was questioning the logic and legality of the rule against it.
And we must look at the context of why he was questioning that rule.
Right.
Why did preserving an exact, undeniable audio record matter so much to him at this stage?
Well, in the father's experience up to that point, objective evidence was literally the only tool he had to combat the agency's shifting narratives.
He specifically points out in the files that body camera footage taken by the police during those earlier no trespass incidents was critical.
Because that objective video evidence allowed him to compare what actually happened against the agency's written representations.
Right, so think about his mindset sitting in that hearing room.
He's already experienced the state getting dates wrong in their official filings.
He's seen them deny his disability in writing.
He has watched them brush off his FOAA requests with generic pamphlets.
So when he is told he cannot record the hearing, he pushes back and asks why.
It's like a student who has been repeatedly misquoted by a teacher, asking why they aren't allowed to take notes during the lecture, and the teacher assuming they're cheating just for asking the question.
That's exactly it. Preserving an accurate record hadn't just become like a hobby for him.
No, it was an existential necessity born from a system that had repeatedly proving it could not keep its own record straight.
Which logically brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. The handling of his disability.
Because this wasn't just a paperwork issue, was it?
No, it was fundamentally an issue of access. How did the agency handle his communication needs throughout this incredibly stressful adversarial process?
So let's review what the ADA documents actually say. We know from the March 30th, 2026 notice of decision that his accommodations were formally granted on paper.
The state agreed to specific modifications.
Right, providing advance notice of hearings by email, sending a copy of the rules by email, providing written notice of deadlines, and supplying a list of legal representation sources.
But in the realm of civil rights law, there is a massive canyon between bureaucratic compliance, some ADA coordinator checking a box on a form in a back office, and providing meaningful access in practice.
Right. Were these accommodations actually implemented when he was standing face-to-face with agency staff?
The father vehemently argues they were not.
In his rebuttal to the Human Rights Commission, he claims that his disabilities were routinely downplayed or entirely ignored by frontline staff,
He specifically references the body camera footage from the Biddeford police.
claiming it shows Assistant Program Administrator Amy Silly actively denying and downplaying his disability in person, despite his formal VA medical documentation.
He argues that the department repeatedly failed to engage in what the law calls the interactive process.
The interactive process, what does that mean exactly in this context?
Under the ADA and the Maine Human Rights Act, an agency can't just dictate accommodations from on high. They must engage in an interactive dialogue with the disabled person to figure out what actually works for them.
A conversation.
Exactly. And the father argues that when he was showing up to the offices seeking clarification about those confusing delayed no trespass letters, his persistence was actually a symptom of his disability. He needed clear, unambiguous communication.
Yes. But instead of accommodating that need, the agency mischaracterized his persistence as harassment and disruptive conduct.
And this clash between his disability and the agency's expectations ties directly back to that abandoned January hearing.
It does. The hearing officer, Thomas Diebold, sent a letter on January 30th, 2026.
In it, he warned that further, quote, disruptive conduct, which he described as the father talking over people or arguing after a ruling is made, would result in the total abandonment of the appeal.
The father's documented position is tragic in its bureaucratic irony.
Yeah.
He argues that his hearing was dismissed for this supposed disruptive conduct, while his disability-related communication needs were actively being mischaracterized or ignored by the very hearing officer running the room.
If a participant has a cognitive or communication disability, a rigid adherence to traditional hearing room decorum, without providing meaningful accommodation for how that person processes information, well, it effectively operates as a total denial of access. You aren't judging the merits of his case anymore. You're penalizing him for his disability.
So how does this sprawling, contradictory saga finally conclude?
It ends with a whimper from the very body designed to oversee these issues.
On July 14, 2026, the Maine Human Rights Commission issues a standard dismissal letter.
The executive director states that the commission reviewed the, quote, entire contents of this file.
But they ultimately concluded the complaint failed to substantiate a claim of discrimination.
And this is where we have to look at the structural realities of administrative oversight. The MHRC says it reviewed the entire contents.
But as we've just spent this entire deep dive discussing, the contents of this file are deeply objectively contradictory.
The agency says he trespassed in early March. The intake logs prove it was mid-March.
The agency legally denies knowing about his disability. Their own ADA office grants a formal accommodation for it.
If an oversight body takes the agency's overarching narrative at face value without aggressively interrogating those internal documentary contradictions,
then the review process isn't an investigation at all. It's merely ceremonial.
exactly.
So as we wrap up, I really want to address you, the listener. Why should you care about this highly specific, incredibly dense bureaucratic case from Maine?
Because it highlights the terrifying asymmetry of power between a lone citizen and the state.
Think about the massive resources at play here. The Department of Health and Human Services has hundreds of employees, assistant attorneys general, hearing officers, and public access coordinators.
Ryan Michaels is one father sitting at a kitchen table trying to figure out how to see his kids.
If the bureaucratic machine gets your dates wrong, if they conveniently lose the policy directives justifying why your appeal is frozen, or if they delay your due process while family court permanently alters your life, the practical consequences fall entirely on your shoulders.
In this case, the crushing weight of those discrepancies fell squarely on a family.
It is a profound reminder that the official record is not an infallible truth handed down from on high.
No, it is a document created by fallible human beings, working within a sprawling system that is ultimately designed to protect its own finality and minimize its own liability.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we sign off today.
If a government agency's official records contain objectively verifiable contradictions, such as legally denying knowledge of a citizen's disability in one document while formally accommodating that exact same disability in another, at what point does the burden of proof legally and morally shift?
Right. Should administrative oversight bodies be required by law to independently audit the evidence when these glaring contradictions appear, rather than just taking the agency's word for it?
How much trust can we truly place in the official record when the ink is controlled entirely by the state?
Next time you're stuck on hold with a bureaucracy, remember the flight recorder. The data is always there, if someone is just willing to look closely enough to see where the system failed.